Thanks for stopping by the Kidnapped by the Mob web series. How would you feel if you found out your grandparents had a dark past? This story starts when I found some 16mm home movies shot in the mid-1930s. Hello, my name is Jeff Redlick, and this is a story about my grandparents, my dad, Chicago, and Palm Springs in the 1920s and the 1930s, and the Chicago outfit. When I was a kid growing up, I was fascinated by Al Capone and Chicago gangster stories. When I was 11 years old, The Untouchables was on TV.
The Untouchables, a Desilu production.
Prohibition, 1932. The city of Chicago was consuming alcohol at the rate of 32 million gallons a year. The figures are incredible, but they are documented. 86,000 gallons a day. It was manufactured in everything from massive distilleries to grimy bathtubs. It came into the brawling city by truck and motor car, by pop bottles and pipelines.
I asked my dad one night, who grew up in Chicago, was it really like that? Referring to all the gangsters and the shooting from cars.
It was like the Old West growing up in Chicago. The grandmother kept her car garaged a few blocks away from where the 1929 St. Valentine's Day Massacre took place.
Remember this part about the kidnapping. It's going to come up later on in our story.
My friend from college, Jerry Factor, and I were kidnapped one night by gangsters. When they realized they had the wrong guys, they tossed us out of the car.
I then asked him, "Did you know any of these gangsters?" He told me.
I was in a card game one night with some men who I later found out were high up in the crime organization. I didn't know it at the time because they were all perfect gentlemen.
And that was all he ever said about his early life in Chicago. My mom was also quiet about those years. In 1969, after my mom passed away, I found some old 16mm movies in storage. I moved them with me from place to place for over 15 years, never knowing what was on them. One Christmas Eve in the 1980s, my dad was over, and he was in his late 70s then. I asked him again. He'd had a couple vodkas and was pretty relaxed. "Did you know any of these gangsters in Chicago in the 20s and the 30s? And this time he said in a low voice,
Yes.
I got access to a 16mm film projector, and when I threaded it up and turned it on, the film sprockets started to break. The film was too old and had become brittle. I shut off the projector right away. I got the film treated in a formaldehyde bath at a film lab in San Francisco, California, to keep it flexible and from breaking up in the projector. The film was silent, taken at my grandparents Mildred and Al Epstein's residence in Palm Springs. They called the compound the Palms. They had bought 4 homes in this compound in Palm Springs, moving from Chicago. Property deeds have that it was purchased in April 1936. These films may have been taken in the summer of 1936. I'd been there as a kid, riding my tricycle around that beautiful swimming pool, getting into everybody's business. There were lots of people in the film. Some I recognized and many I did not. I asked my dad if he'd get the films put on VHS tape and do a voiceover naming the people in the film. He was 82 years old when he got around to doing that in 1996. Unfortunately, he and I never sat down and watched this together, so I could ask even more questions about who was in those films. In 2014, I got the original film put direct to DVD, and I started digging into who all these people were. It's been over 45 years since I first found the films, and working from the stories my dad told me when I was a kid about he and his friend Jerry Factor from Chicago getting kidnapped, and using the internet, I found some interesting history on the 23-plus people my dad mentioned in his voiceover. He never went into much detail outside of a few notable friends like Sophie Tucker, Abe and Jack Pritzker, Charlie Carell from Amos and Andy, Judge Abe Marovitz and Judge Joe Drucker, composer-lyricist Burton Lane, Mac Gordon, Eddie and Peter Duchin, and a few more. My grandparents' friends were a mixed group comprised of attorneys, actors, stage entertainers, radio personalities, band leaders, nightclub owners, song composers, judges, politicians, and mobsters. I kept connecting the dots, and a picture started to form that surprised me. My step-grandfather, Al Epstein, who was the only grandfather that I ever knew, was involved with all these people, and I couldn't figure out why they all came to Palm Springs as a group. All my dad ever said was,
He was an entertainment attorney, and his offices were down the hall from the Pritzker's offices in Chicago.
all of this happened over 80 years ago. The reports vary depending on who wrote the story. I'm working off the 16mm films with my dad's voiceover and his recollections of Chicago to me in the 1950s, research I did on the internet, and reading several books about that era. In Chapter 2, I'm going to go through these old 1930s movies and identify some of the friends who visited my grandparents.